All right, well, let's go ahead and get into it. My name is Dan Jeline. Welcome. I'm happy to welcome you today to the latest CSCRS Collaborative Sciences Center for Road Safety webinar. We're going to focus today on using social media to understand challenges faced by urban delivery drivers, a really interesting topic. Our panelists will get into it shortly. For those not familiar with CSCRS, we aim to make progress in reducing transportation injuries and fatalities by utilizing a systems approach, bringing perspectives from planning, engineering, public health, data science, and robotics to the road safety field. We're one of two national centers with a specific focus, research focus on transportation safety. We bring together staff, faculty, and students from across UNC departments and from our partner universities listed here on the slide. I'm excited to introduce to you two panelists who will be joining us today. First, Dana Magliola is the Multimodal Freight and Logistics Program Manager in the Rail Division of North Carolina DOT. And Dr. Evan Iacobucci is a postdoctoral research associate at the University of North Carolina's Department of City and Regional Planning. You'll hear from them shortly. First, just a bit of housekeeping. You're muted as participants today, but you do have the ability to submit questions to us within the Zoom webinar platform. You'll see where you can submit those questions. We're holding some time at the end to get into some of that discussion. We are recording today's session. We'll be making that available through the CSCRS website later. Just one helpful Zoom tip, if you're unsure about the view you're using, we recommend you use the speaker view option at the top of your Zoom screen to both see the speaker and the slides. And so with that, Dana, I'll turn things over to you.
Dan, thank you, and welcome everybody this afternoon. You know, I'm real pleased to both interact and engage with CSCRS regularly in my role here at NCDOT, but also proud to serve on the board of advisors for CSCRS, and really important mission. Today's gonna be really exciting. We're working with somebody that I work with regularly on some research and have gotten to know, and I think you'll enjoy getting to know Dr. Iacobucci. But I wanted to introduce you to him real quick. Evan, Buffalo, New York native, holds a PhD in planning and public policy from Rutgers after earning his master's in urban planning at the University of Buffalo. His research interests include travel behavior, transportation equity, and the relationship between attitudes, perceptions, social factors, and transportation. And as mentioned, he's currently a postdoctoral research scholar at the University of North Carolina there at Chapel Hill. Evan, I'd love to introduce you and turn over the floor. Evan's going to share some, I think, really unique research and a different perspective than we're used to hearing. Evan?
Great, thanks, Dana. That's probably the best introduction I've ever had. So I'm gonna share my screen here and get the slides back up. Someone tell me if they can't see, but I think we should be good to go here. And I'm gonna share some research on reports from the battle for the curb. So about delivery drivers and the challenges they face. And I want to start by getting into a little bit of background and why we care. So there has recently been an explosion in urban freight in terms of volume and in terms of oops, make that big again, and velocity. In 2019, there were 14.7 billion parcels delivered in the United States. In 2020, onset of the pandemic, that shot up to 20.2 billion parcels being delivered. At the same time, rapid shipping has become table stakes, right? So people expect their packages to arrive in 2 days in a lot of cases. That means that there are a lot of curb and traffic impacts. So more delivery vehicles means more truck traffic, more congestion, more competition for the curb, more parking, and that means more unauthorized parking behavior. And we care because that has major impacts on safety, right? So dense urban areas attract more freight. They also attract more vulnerable road users. Commercial vehicle parking directly affects vulnerable road user behavior and safety. And we care about that. Drivers become VRUs when they exit the truck, and we often overlook that fact as well. So we have this picture on the right showing the situation. A truck is parked in the cycle lane. We have a cyclist that's trying to go around the vehicle. So not only is the cyclist in danger from dipping into the travel lane, but as soon as that driver comes out, there's a potential conflict. And so this brings us to our main research question, right? And that is, what kinds of challenges, particularly related to safety, do parcel delivery drivers encounter while interfacing with the curb? And I'll get us into our data and methods for that. So to look into this, we turn to Reddit. For the uninitiated, Reddit is a social content sharing site. It's a place where people post in specific communities called subreddits. And others can respond to the original poster, whom we affectionately refer to as OP. And we search subreddits dedicated to employees of 3 major carriers, so Amazon, FedEx, and UPS. And this is what that looks like. So you see in the top part, there's someone who's asked a question about delivering in a downtown type area. Other people, how do they handle the situation? And then under that, people can offer answers, their opinions, and have some discussion. To give an overview of the data we used, we ended up with 606 comments. These were posted between August of 2018 and October of 2021, so up to pretty recently. It happened to be Halloween. And the increase in comments that we see in the chart corresponds with the growth of subreddits, the growth of delivery services. They ended up being mostly from Amazon drivers, and we have some sort of pet hypotheses about why that might be. Another crucial component is that the posts are anonymous, which means that people aren't so worried that they're being asked questions about their employer and that kind of stuff. So there's a lot more candor, which we view as a major advantage of using this source. And before I get into our findings, I just want to go through a quick terminological note. Amazon DSP refers to delivery service provider, and those are the people you see in the Amazon branded vans and step vans. Whereas Amazon Flex is another service they offer that uses gig workers who deliver packages in their own cars. And you can kind of think of that as like Uber or Lyft for parcels. And so we'll look at some of the urban delivery challenges we saw. So first, this is a quote from a Flex driver that I think really kind of sums up the situation. I said, everybody who works this gig knows it's a gamble, and getting a downtown route is the opposite of hitting the jackpot. We have some overpopulated cities with horrible infrastructure and seemingly no accommodations for delivery personnel in their vehicles. But honestly, what is to be done? And to look at some of these challenges and sort of overview, the biggest thing that people talked about was that it takes too long to deliver in cities. But takes too long is kind of made out of other challenges, right? So other things cause the route to take too long. And the next biggest thing is parking, followed by building access and a bunch of other things that make things take longer as well. But parking was a major concern. And in looking at the parking strategies, I want to point out that drivers prioritized parking legally when possible. They definitely preferred to do it that way. And they did things like using their hazard lights. They tried to be as quick as possible. Sometimes they would park further away and deliver on foot. They would use loading zones when that was possible. But legal parking was not always possible, and it certainly wasn't always pragmatic. And when that was the case, they often ended up engaging in authorized parking or unauthorized parking. And so we tracked the types that they mentioned. And so by far the biggest were parking on the wrong side of the street and kinds of parking that involved blocking the road, followed by my absolute favorite, wherever I want. And then a slew of other sort of prohibited or no-no parking behaviors. And we also tracked the reasons that drivers talked about for engaging in unauthorized parking. So by far and away, the biggest one being that there's no place to park. Again, that it takes too long not to. And then if you look in this other collection, there are some that kind of address safety pretty directly to avoid crossing the street, that it feels safer to let traffic pass because otherwise they're going to be a hazard. And so drivers were really concerned about their parking behavior disrupting others. They often viewed it as necessary. And their reasons for doing so revolved around supply of parking, the time spent finding parking, and safety issues. And so we'll look at what some of that looked like. So in terms of not being able to find a place to park, there's a Flex driver who says, because there's no parking, many times we're forced to park illegally for Amazon's sake, which obviously is not right and feels horrible. Another Flex driver says, obviously, if I can't find parking, I'm going to be forced to double park or whatever. There's a DSP driver who says, I don't even care about the laws. I blocked the whole street before. Anyone who has something to say about it can get lost. When I parallel park, I do it because it's the easiest option, and I don't want to cart 30 packages down 2 city blocks. In a lot of cases, it's the only option. And looking at issues of it taking too long, a driver says, usually I try to be a nice and courteous driver. When I'm downtown, I have to be an a-hole or else I can't get everything delivered in time. If I parked legally every time, I would always be going over, right, taking too long on their assigned routes. And this is in response to someone who was worried about parking on the wrong side, said, you mean you don't park on the opposite side? That's how you shave time off routes. And then finally, that unauthorized parking could sometimes be safer. So here's a driver who says, I've almost been hit twice trying to cross a busy road. I would rather be fired or ticketed than die holding an Amazon package. I'm personally not interested in getting hit by some craphead on their cell phone. And the less time I spend crossing streets, the less likely that is to happen. And a more comprehensive one, this is a DSP driver who says, 99% of the drivers I know will only block traffic if there's absolutely no other option. It's almost never done maliciously or for the driver's convenience. I will often break rules or inconvenience myself to ensure the safety of everyone on the road with me. And I've gotten a tongue lashing from customers and bystanders for it. Whether it's pulling into a driveway backwards or parking on the wrong side of the street in some cases, usually I'll give pushback to anyone who gives me crap for putting safety first. And so, once these phenomena are kind of in your brain, you see it all over the place. I took all of these pictures just kind of walking around. The big one at left is at home on UNC's campus. We see a UPS truck has popped up on the sidewalk there. And the reason they're doing it is because otherwise they would be blocking traffic in the road in front of Davie Hall. The one on the upper right is in Minneapolis. You can see another UPS package cart. Not picking on UPS, those are just the one I happen to see. But they've decided to park in the exit of the parking garage for an apartment complex to be out of the way while they're making their deliveries. And then the last one is an Amazon van, and this is on Jones Ferry Road, so also very close to UNC's campus. And this is a perfect example of this wrong side of the street parking where they have pulled all the way over to the left. But the reason that they've done that is because otherwise they would have to park on the right side, run across what either is or is at least treated like a 55-mile-an-hour road, deliver the package, and then run back across. So they're both time and safety concerns in doing that. Merging back into traffic is going to be another matter, but that's a good look at how that works. And so the last thing I want to share that we tracked was interactions with other road users. And so these are some of the things that we saw people talking about. Drivers were concerned about blocking others with their delivery vehicle, things like yelled at and honked at. And then some other ones are like potential crashes or cars going around their vehicle. And these really sort of fall into two main types. So we have these interpersonal conflicts ones, like the yelling between other road users and drivers, and those can be unsafe sometimes. I mean, there were a couple of stories about physical altercations. But in terms of what we're really looking at here, these delivery conditions, especially parking conditions, seem to set up high-risk situations on a day-to-day basis. And so looking at what some of those are, here, this is a thread where a DSP driver asked, when you're parked on a busy road, do you ever think this could be the day a driver rear-ends the van and kills me? Another driver says, yeah, I'm standing in the back of the van, hearing cars and trucks whip past and praying I don't rag down like an unsecured box. Another one says, no, but I did wonder if I would get hit by a car getting out of the van sometimes. And someone who says, we actually had a guy who was getting a package in the back and someone hit the van from behind at about 40 miles per hour. So, these conditions, maybe nothing happens most of the time, but the set of conditions where eventually something happens. And so to get into some wrap up, drivers have needed to adapt to increased parcel volume and competition at the curb. A lot of drivers did not enjoy being assigned downtown routes. They considered them to be long and difficult, and parking was viewed as a major challenge. And these findings kind of corroborate evidence that parking for commercial vehicles is undersupplied, and that there's not enough, and this results in unauthorized parking. But on top of that, in addition to the undersupply, drivers used unauthorized parking because it took too long to find a legal spot or walk. The safest option was sometimes not authorized. And something I didn't have time to get into, but that came up a bunch also, is that parking enforcement sort of often turned a blind eye because they realize that people just need to do their jobs and they're not gonna write tickets for what effectively are regular practices. And this has some substantial safety implications. So for one thing, drivers are really concerned for their own safety, but moreover, some of these regular operating practices, at least in the sample that we saw, which is not necessarily representative, create unsafe situations, right, for drivers and for other road users. And I'll close with just some potential policy implications. So in the short term, there are things that can be done relatively quickly, like adding commercial vehicle loading zones to commercial blocks, that they're dedicated places or more dedicated places than there already are for vehicles to park. Some low-cost freight demand management strategies, things like common carrier lockers, so that a bunch of packages can all be taken to a central point instead of needing to be driven all over the place where they can be collected by people. And just more awareness and sort of space of city and regional planning of these freight problems. Planners have, whether on purpose or just because it hasn't come up, often let the market sort of solve these freight issues. And there's some conversations that really need to start happening to create some synergy between these parties. In the longer term, a lot of zoning codes often do require some sort of minimum off-street loading zones, but they vary. They're all over the place and they're not necessarily rationalized. Those could be sort of brought into the modern era to make more sense. Vision Zero plans, fortunately, seem to be starting to adapt to freight, but this is also something that maybe should be even more on the radar in those spaces. And overall, that when we think about street design and redesigning streets for all road users and for all road users to be safe, right, things like that we talk about with Complete Streets initiatives, these should include freight users as well. And finally, innovative solutions from emerging technologies might play an increasingly large role. Things that are now possible, like app-based curb reservation systems, where drivers can make a reservation, ensure that a space will be available at the time that they're going to arrive. Micro hubs, like the pilot effort that's in this picture, where things can be brought to a central location in a neighborhood and then either picked up there, or in this particular example in Seattle, they're delivered to the neighborhood on cargo bicycles. And finally, more on the forefront, and sometimes they're controversial, but things like autonomous vehicles, right? The droids, the little things that roll on the sidewalk, drones that fly packages, and even automated trucks might find their roles in looking at a more inclusive freight landscape that's safer. And before I turn things over to Dana, I just want to acknowledge some other co-authors on this work, Noreen McDonald, Charles Edwards, and Ruth Steiner, who are also part of the team and have been very helpful. And with that, I'm going to move on to questions and let Dana ask some questions.
Sure, Evan, thanks for sharing. And there's a lot of content in there. A few of the things that I wanted to point out that we'll discuss briefly, and then we can look to our attendees for more questions, more discussion afterwards. One of the things that I think is really important to this research is that we're looking at a different data source. We're taking, we're so familiar with, I think, regular data sources that we fail to take opportunities like social media. And in this case, Reddit is a great example of a place to find that kind of data that's really from the people experiencing those issues. What led you to look to Reddit, and what are some of the challenges you felt in researching that with Reddit, with a new and kind of unique source like this?
Yeah, I think one of the difficulties in doing research on freight at all, whatever aspect you're interested in looking into, is that first of all, data is proprietary in a lot of cases. A lot of things are sort of operators' special sauce, and they don't want competitors to get their hands on it, and they don't want you maybe accidentally sharing that. They want to keep that close to their chest. And then also, in terms of things that maybe they do, maybe they don't track, but things like the behaviors or perceptions of drivers are also going to be really difficult to get. And people are concerned about keeping their jobs and don't want to get caught saying things. A lot of these companies actually have social media policies where they really encourage you to comport yourself in a particular way and to preferably not tweet or whatever you're going to do at all. And being really interested in this issue, I think our team kind of thought, well, how are we going to get at this? And I have some experience working with social media and Reddit in particular, and some past work. And it turned out that there were these spaces where these conversations were happening, and there was some interesting stuff. And we thought that, well, if we could systematize this and look at this in a more I guess scientific way a little bit, we might be able to get some interesting insights.
I like that you take an approach to get down to people involved. There's the humanizing aspect of a data like Reddit. These are actual experiences of people that are involved in the field. And one of the other things that I really like that you bring out in your research is that drivers themselves become vulnerable road users. And really, that's something that even as going in as a driver, they know they're dealing with. I love that we look to policy and planning to mitigate risky situations for pedestrians, bicyclists, drivers, taking into account people that are really working in that space, in that gray area, like drivers. I think that's a really interesting approach here, one that I really wanted to point out. Tell me a little bit of your thoughts on really how drivers play into this as a part of the moving pieces.
Sure. Yeah, I'm glad to talk about that a little more. I glossed over a little bit while I was trying to make sure I wasn't on mute in the beginning. But yeah, I think that's a major point when we're thinking about how to evolve these spaces, because I think it's easy to sort of accidentally like group the drivers into just this entity of like the shipping companies, and we assume that, well, maybe they don't care, or they're almost the bad guy, and because they're doing the illegal parking, they're in the bike lane, they're causing safety issues, and it turns out they're also vulnerable to being struck by vehicles and those kinds of things. It's not funny, and that often the considerations are not there for them either. And if those things aren't also brought into sort of the thought as we rethink how to design these spaces and how to design these processes of ensuring that goods get to their destinations, we can make mistakes. And so I'm thinking of an example I saw in another presentation about, I think, New York City, where they've done some really cool stuff in terms of acknowledging that when we have a bicycle lane, we have a really big problem of vehicles blocking the bicycle lane. So they re-engineered the street to have a specific place for the truck to be. The bicycle lane went around it. This problem that I showed in that picture in the beginning had been solved. But it was at mid-block. There was no curb cut mid-block for a dolly. And so what ended up happening is that the driver had to put stuff onto the dolly, walk in the travel lane to the end of the street, and then take that up the curb at the end. So it's kind of this law of unintended consequences. Like when you don't think about these things, or don't realize that they're happening, you can fail to plan. And so having that in the consciousness, I think, helps with the mission of really making streets accessible and safe for all of the people who need to use them.
I think that's a good point. And, we can speak to some successes where they serve this constituency, but kind of leave the others out in the risky space in that area. One of the things that we're dealing with in this entire situation is a major paradigm shift in consumer behavior. And, you touched on this early. We're so used to ordering things, e-commerce is booming. And you couple that with an increasing urban population, growing urban centers. This is not a problem going away anytime soon. I like that you brought up technology, AI, some of these bots. I know when we talked about this presentation, I showed you a picture of a sidewalk delivery bot that I had seen out in California. And, I feel like there's some element of that's a future for us. How does that play out in your mind? What does the future look like in this space?
Yeah, we've given this a bunch of thought, and I think this is one of those situations where it could go a bunch of different ways, right? Like you said, the volume isn't going away; it's only going to get worse, and we're only talking about parcels and what I showed today too, right? But we have things like dark stores and grocery delivery, and all the list goes on and on in those services, and all those are moving through limited space. My sort of hope in the I think one of the things that can come out of this, and that can come out of parties that haven't traditionally talked very much talking more, is that we could build some synergies and look at some common needs and some ways that solve both problems. So, for example, like the automated vehicles that you bring up, the little sort of rolling coolers that are kind of cute. Those don't go on the road where cars go typically. Those go on sidewalks, or maybe bicycle lanes, or those kinds of things. And I think that's bringing awareness to a bunch of different people, just how difficult it can be to navigate sidewalks or bicycle lanes, those kinds of things, or to navigate sidewalks as someone who maybe needs to use a wheelchair, and sometimes just how little space is dedicated to those things. I think there's a potential where improvements for those things could also mean improvements for cyclists and pedestrians and safety, if they're sort of planned simultaneously. So I think at least that would be the direction that I would, were it up to me, push things towards.
Sort of those positive externalities.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the last things, and we can look to the questions here thereafter, but having conversations outside of the normal group of stakeholders with which you'd engage, and I think this is something you're seeing the horizons expand in planning. Even at the DOT level, engaging with industry more regularly, understanding each other. I think that's an element, sort of a lesson learned from this whole experience, is that the companies have incentive, drivers have a different incentive that's similar to the companies, but at the same time has these characteristics of other road users. Getting everybody talking, getting everybody interacting early in the process, I think is an important point that you draw out. Well, one of the good things about a webinar like this with someone as qualified as you, Evan, is you've covered everything, because we've got no questions coming out of the audience. And I had a couple of questions, but would love to turn it over to our attendees. If you have questions, go ahead and jump in there in the question and answer spot.
Sorry, I'm having trouble connecting to the internet.
Clearly, Alexa didn't have any questions for us either in my office.
Yeah.
But I think that may be it a little bit. Dan, I think we can wrap up just a few minutes before we're supposed to.
Definitely. Thanks to both of you. I had a question of my own. If nobody else has one, maybe I'll jump in line. Just kind of curious, Evan, from your perspective, what other interesting research questions did you identify that might spur on some future projects, kind of building on what you've done here, either the data set or the topic you covered?
Yeah, so I think we're still in process with some of that, but one of the things I think that we need to figure out how to look into is how these things vary across context, because the population of people who are ordering packages, making more traffic and causing externalities are not limited to just your New York Cities or your downtown Seattle, right? These are sort of causing issues from that dense end of the spectrum to even suburban and rural areas. But, a lot of the United States are these mid-sized areas that might not have the same problems. And so the solutions that adapt to those contexts might look a little bit different too. And that's kind of one of the limitations of the approach that we've taken so far, is that while we're able to take this sort of like broad view and get people from all over, we're not necessarily able to say like, and that applies in this exact context, and we have a really good read on exactly what this problem is here. We need to kind of some more information about what those problems are, how different solutions scale, and when they're going to be appropriate. So I think it's very much not one size fits all.
No, thanks for that. That's great. I think you can probably look at a lot of different contexts, and it's a topic that, as I'm watching your presentation, everyone has like thoughts and opinions and their own experiences with this kind of stuff too. So thank you for sharing, Dana. Thank you for navigating that for us and helping with the Q&A. Thanks to everybody for joining. We are going to be sending out some information pretty soon on our next webinar, as well as some information of where you can find the recording and other materials from this session. So keep your eyes peeled for that. We look forward to seeing you all next time. Thanks very much.
Thank you.